Hello to people that have just joined. I think we're just waiting for a couple of moments for others to arrive, and then we'll kick off probably in about 2 minutes. Okay, we might just kick off then. We'll get through possibly some intros and some hellos whilst anyone else that still needs to join arrives. So I guess thank you for attending. I think we've sent out a few notes about what to expect from the session today. It's all about really securing public services, specifically around the security requirements of the integrated care systems boards, the 42 ICS regions in the UK, but not just about the specifics of the ICS. We're also going to be touching on some of the detail around the provider organisations and moving towards a more strategic way of dealing with handling evolving cybersecurity across both region and the ICS, and also the organisations that sit within the providers. In terms of intros, so my name is Jim Lester. I head up something called the head of customer transformation at MTI. Typically, that tends to be cybersecurity, data center transformation work. That's what MTI's speciality is. You might have met me. I've been working with NHS Digital as part of their cyber improvement program now for, I'm going to say, about 6 years. Really since the response to WannaCry. So we've delivered quite a lot of services on behalf of NHS Digital over the last 6 years. And I'm joined by Dan Jeffrey, who will introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jim. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, my name's Dan Jeffrey. I'm a managing director at Dayinter, which is a specialist and boutique kind of cyber privacy and data organisation. I've been here for about a year. Prior to that, I was in the NHS myself. I was the CISO and Deputy CIO for NHS Blood and Transplant for about 3 years. And then prior to that, I was at NHS Digital, where I ran the National Cyber Programme. And that's where I first met Jim.
Indeed. And then John, on to you.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. John Lamont. I'm the cybersecurity lead for the NHS in Suffolk and North East Essex, ICS, part of the digital data and technology team. And very happy to be here and talk about what MTI have been up to with our ICS, in particular around our cybersecurity strategy.
Great stuff. I guess in terms of the session, so we've got about an hour, a little less than that now. We're fairly keen to get as many questions as we can into the chat. I think the cameras and mics will be locked down, so if you do have any questions, then just put those into the chat, and we'll do a Q&A. We'll probably run that. There are some logical breakpoints as we move through the agenda. So the first part that we'll start looking at is context. Context effectively will be broken into 3 different areas. So we'll look at the integrated care landscape specifically, and how digital generally is now and has been for a while seen as a critical enabler to sustainability and integrated care, full stop. We'll look at security and privacy. Dan will touch on the landscape there. I mean, Dan's been involved in some fairly good work more recently around Cinebis event. So I think we can share some of the thoughts around that, I guess, in terms of landscape, without sort of oversharing, I think. And then we'll touch on, the MTI-SNE relationship, what we've been doing at the ICS level, and also the individual provider level. There's sort of there's a relationship there that stems back 3 or 4 years now. Although we've helped those guys work on cyber strategy, there's other stuff that we've done that we think might be of interest and sort of fits into cyber resilience and the strategic approach more generally. So like I say, we've shared, I think, a couple of articles in advance. You should have received a policy, so model policy that we have written that effectively focuses on one specific area, vulnerability management, just to use that as an example. And we've sent you the SNEF strategy, so that's an organizational provider level strategy that we worked on with Carl and the guys at SNEF for 2023 to 26, so it's just over a year old now, that strategy. So you should have those two documents, and you should be able to review those. If you haven't had a chance to look at those, then fine, but if there's any questions that you've got as a result of receiving those docs, then by all means fire them into the chat. The sort of second phase, so once we get past context, I'll pause at a holding slide effectively, and we'll do a Q&A at that point. So any specific questions you've got from that first third, fire them in and we'll get them answered either by John. If you could call out if you want John to specifically pick out on anything, as a currently in the NHS and kind of the recipients of some of these services, then by all means call out that you want John to answer. Otherwise, Dan and I can pick up. Then we'll look at the cyber strategy specifically. So that's the one that we've developed for the ICS. Again, I should say on that the strategy is in development. I think we're going for board approval. Forgive me if I'm wrong here, John, in end of July.
That's correct.
Great. So we're still in draft, but I guess there was we're looking to try and, I guess, share some of the work that we've done more widely with the system. The initial work that we've done has been received very, very well. So I think Dan was very keen, John was very keen that we share the process that we followed and some of the artifacts and some of the thinking that we're following to help other ICSs or indeed providers that are on the same or similar journey. So I think it's important that we did that before that was formally approved and the ICS are comfortable with that. And then we'll look at sort of turning strategy into action. So one of the things that all of the ICSs, ICBs have been charged with doing is creating a strategy by I think one of the initial gate for getting those approved is in September. That doesn't just mean creating a strategy, it also means coming up with an actionable plan, and that plan is reportable, so you can basically demonstrate your successes against the plan over time. So 3 things really: it's the strategy, there's the action plan, and there is the MI, effectively the management information that helps report up the line, but also across the different providers on successes and failures. QA session will hold towards the end, but if you're asking them as we move forwards, then we'll hopefully pick those up before we get to the end. And like I said, if you've got any questions whatsoever, you want to make them specific, put them in the chat. So context-wise, I'm not going to sort of teach you to suck eggs on integrated care in any way, shape, or form. You know more than I do about that. But I think the key part of integrated care, from our perspective, and I guess as we've worked within the system and with the system for a number of years, there's those 4 aims of integration that are fairly well published. All of the ICSs have got their own strategies for moving those things forward and aiming towards meeting the key aims of the ICS strategy. All of those strategies that I've seen have been absolutely underpinned by doing things in a more digital way. So digital transformation, to use a sort of slightly old term now, but doing things in a more digital way is absolutely critical to success. I think the whole system realizes that. There are some challenges with doing that. I think, MTI have now been working across the NHS, like I say, 6 years or so on technical remediation projects. So we've got a good view of, some of the key problem areas, I guess, or challenge spaces. There are lots of different, more detailed, I guess, symptoms of these problems, but we think the sort of biggest issues that the system's got to deal with for digital transformation before we get into cyber there's an awful lot of technical debt around the system. That doesn't just mean out-of-date operating systems, that's part of it, but that also means digital maturity. So, particularly process, we think is quite lacking across the system. So really that should be, I guess, digital debt is probably a better term for that. We've used tech debt because I think that's more familiar to most people. Obviously, skills in technology generally are really quite difficult to come by. Competition's really heavy, even more so in cyber, even more so in the public sector. And then siloed businesses, that's within providers themselves. The NHS has developed up to fix particular problems with people. That has developed into a very siloed way of delivering care, and sometimes the teams that work within the system, there isn't a huge amount of communication between the two. And then there's obviously it's a disaggregated system with lots of different providers. The ICS is now obviously include different types of provider as well. So very siloed, and I think inefficient investment. Not necessarily that there's been a lack of investment. I mean, there has been, but I think the bigger problem, as we see it, is that investment is made in the wrong way quite frequently. There's lots of capital investment, probably an underinvestment in people and process, lots of investment in new technologies that sometimes don't get deployed in the right way. So I think those key challenges, really, when we first started talking to John, were, how do we help with those challenges as part of a cybersecurity strategy? So effectively, how do we make cyber and privacy an enabler of the sorts of change necessary to move integrated care forwards? So I guess on the security landscape specifically, I guess, Dan, do you want to pick up on?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So I'm assuming most folks, if not all folks on the call, will have a fairly comprehensive and detailed understanding of the threat and privacy landscape across health and care, and from both a cybersecurity and a privacy perspective. It's not just a case of kind of clinical risk and financial risk and compliance risk. These are three core areas that we have to focus on. There are a number of different drivers from a cyber perspective for each of these, but ultimately the cumulative kind of total of all of this is the impact on the delivery of patient and clinical care and services. And these are the main outcome of all of this. This is what we've seen with challenges such as Synovis recently, which you can see right in the middle box there. Initial kind of analysis is saying that will cost, the economic impact of that is going to run into the tens of millions, with thousands of kind of patients being impacted at the end of the day. It's almost as Kieran Martin said on the BBC, the fact that the data was exfilled and kind of put up for the ransom, etc. That's the least of the problems. The challenge is that what we have is an impact on our day-to-day operations. So the consequences of not addressing the cyber and the privacy challenge are really real, and we are kind of living through it in certain parts of the country as we speak. The landscape is getting more complicated as we go down and continue down our digitization kind of journey. The threat landscape is broadening. The boundary edge is becoming more amorphous, and also the demand on our kind of cyber resources is increasing at a time when the availability of those resources is decreasing effectively. So we have this really difficult Gordian knot from which to unpick. And this is where strategy and the whole kind of holistic approach really comes into its own being in terms of the value it generates, because it enables you to be really targeted and specific on the areas of improvement based on risk, based on threat, whilst at the same time having that operational kind of cadence and resilience that is required to sustain services in as optimized manner as possible. You know, there are some real kind of hard levers that we have to kind of navigate and negotiate around on that compliance side. You know, we have kind of the looming spectre, if you will, of GDPR and NISR. Now, luckily and fortunately, at this precise minute in time, the commissioner for the ICO is taking the stance of not going too hard over on public sector organisations that have had breaches, right? Unless there has been some kind of gross negligence. But the fact is there is still a legislative and regulatory obligation on us, on the system, to be able to do what is necessary to comply with Article 32 of GDPR. We've seen the actual cost of incidents when things go wrong. Yes, we have what is now kind of a classic in WannaCry, because it's now 7 years old. We still hark back to the number of it was 92 million just to clean up, just to kind of respond to and do the initial recovery of the incident. The full cost is much greater than that when we think of the lists, the waiting lists and the overtime and all the additional resources required to get the system back to where it would have been had the event never happened. But the other things, so these are all kind of the negative sides of cyber, if you will. The positive sides of cyber security is the fact that done well, done right, done proportionately, it can actually be an enabler of digital transformation in its kind of purest form. It can save you hours. It can save you time is hours. Hours can save you money, and it can make you much more of an efficient kind of organization, as we have found, right? So with NHS Mail, so back in the national programme days with NHS Mail, we made a £1 million investment on joiners and leavers to automate parts of that process, which ultimately saved around 48,000 hours a year, and equate that in terms of average salary is about 8.2 million as a recurring cost per year. It can generally save time and money if done correctly. It's brave to do it, to do that secure by design up front, but ultimately the benefits are really there, not just in terms of risk reduction, but also in terms of efficiency increases.
So I think that's a great point. And I think as we move through, you know, as we start to sort of look at the vision that we've created with John and the team, I mean, that's the really critical bit of it is it's not just about the scare stories. The scare stories are getting more clear, I think, to particularly to boards and Synovis and HSE and, you know, Advance. They all make the case for improvement, but it's actually when you can demonstrate the real value of doing cyber well, that's when you start to really get traction, and that's what you need to try and capture into your strategic journey. So in terms of the final bit of context, I guess, and get ready with any questions. I'll have a look in a minute to see whether there have been any. The work that we've done with SNE. So I guess SNE, and forgive me, John, SNE is a fairly, you know, average in terms of the size of the population it serves. It's just over 1 million people. There's the usual range of, you know, trusts within there. It's got 2 acutes, I think one, certainly 2 mental health trusts, community mental health trusts, an ambulance trust that sort of serves it and other ICBs, and a couple of local authorities in Essex and Suffolk, and then, you know, many smaller providers within the region. So not an unfamiliar makeup to a lot of you. We started work with SNE a number of years ago, and really that was on a set of projects to improve, almost point projects to improve cyber resilience at the different providers. We tried to make that one a sort of a risk-based approach. So pick up the on the greatest risk and harms theme. Before the national strategy was out. It's difficult to do, to be honest. So I think we agreed then that we'd start to build towards and deliver some services that when we put them together, actually we could then start to develop that into a much more strategic approach, which is, I think we both identified at the time, John, there were lots of point things going on, lots of good practice going on, but no overarching strategy, really, either at the provider level or certainly at the regional level. The ICS wasn't even technically formed then, I guess, or the ICB certainly. So, we made the decision to sort of focus those efforts then on developing a strategic approach. We started by doing an organizational provider strategy, which you can view. I think we sent that example over. Really, because the ICS or the ICBs weren't fully formed and the national strategy for cyber was coming out. So this would have been last year, 2023. So the view was that we would then look to build and create a process for the provider organizational strategy that could then be mirrored and mapped with some common objectives, certainly a common way of measuring in the CAF. And then when we had the ICB formed, we would then go to work on the ICS strategy, which is now the document that we're near completion. And there are other things that we've done to sort of help on that way, like have a look at CAF assessments at different providers and start to build up that mechanism for John and the region, the ICS, I should say, to get a consolidated view of cyber risk as a first step. So you then effectively you're joining the national initiatives to the local provider initiatives, and then you're joining sort of east-west as well to integrate some of the mechanisms and methodologies that are used at the different providers. So a much more fully sort of joined up approach, I think, John. So that's kind of context. In terms of any questions, I'm just going to have a quick look in the chat, see if there's been any. Can't see that there have, which is fine. That's a no, so we'll move on then. So the strategy or the development of the strategy itself, I guess, Dan, if you want to pick up on the approach, this is for the ICS strategy specifically.
Yes. So hi everyone again. So the approach that we took to develop kind of the ICS strategy for kind of core kind of areas, if you will, as we can see here, first of all, kind of the mapping and traceability. So this is to make sure that between kind of the national obligations, if you will, so those objectives, those things which we're directed to achieve from the health and social care cybersecurity strategy 23 through to 30 are all kind of taken into account and accounted for, whilst also ensuring at kind of the local organizational level where they have strategies already in place and where they are kind of robust and fit for purpose, we don't run roughshod over the top of it. So we effectively trace the obligations all the way through from kind of north through to south, so that we are completely joined up across organization, and then that the ICS as the region is able to develop a set of objectives that we can see in the bottom right hand corner here, which actually don't just kind of impose obligations, etc., but also accommodate and ensure that really good work that's already been done at the local level is taken into account for, and actually that we are all kind of singing and pulling in the right direction, sing off one same hymn sheet and pulling in the same direction. And this is where, in order to be able to inform those two parts there around what is important for local organisations, what is their pain points, what are the real challenges, and where do they want to see the strategy take them over the period of time is having some really robust stakeholder engagement, working not just with cyber professionals, not just with privacy professionals, but also speaking to chief clinical officers, speaking to kind of folks on the ground, and kind of the broader IT community as well, to get that really kind of well-formed view. Because as we all know, cyber isn't just a technology problem, and trying to tackle it just as a pure technology problem is going to lead us to kind of the wrong result at the end of the day. We need to understand how the business views it, what their concerns, how they would consume cyber services and capability, etc. How they would consume those is really important as well. So having really robust stakeholder and kind of engagement was completely vital. It helped us to be able to ensure that the mapping from the national strategy, from NHS England's kind of approach, etc., was able to be then translated and converted into a set of objectives by the ICS that was then able to complement and broaden out some of the great work that's already been done at the local level. And that's all grand, right? But we can make those in isolation, but if we don't have some underlying principles and missions from which we can all kind of coalesce around, then actually it all starts to fall apart. It becomes too fragmented and too frayed. So as part of the whole development for John and the ICS strategy, was we came up with kind of 5 kind of core missions, which basically I think we go into in a touch in a minute. They are the focal points from which the rest of the strategy, the objectives, etc., come through, and they're all guided by unifying principles which shape everything, how everything is delivered and the manner in which it is delivered. There's a question from Sean. Jim, if you want to do them.
It looks like the chat is now chat is working, I think. Good. I'll get my question on the Q&A. Right, Jim.
Does strategy. So do you want me to take this one, Jim?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
So, Sean, good question as always. But yes, it does ultimately. The traceability goes all the way down from that national obligation piece through into objectives, then into the initiatives and the principles outlined in the target operating model. So we have that lineage all the way through, and it means that projects, initiatives funded here can be traced all the way up to be it the Defenders 1 set of principles and pillar, or the Foundations of Resilience pillar and the objectives in between.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess the importance of mapping and traceability, I guess, leading us on to that, Sean. Yes, absolutely. Again, to reiterate, the critical thing and the reason that mapping and traceability is so important is exactly that. So what we're trying to do, with making sure that there's alignment in, I guess, that north-south almost, the department, government, I suppose, the government cyber strategy down to the NHS or the healthcare cyber strategy, down into the regions, into the ICSs, into the providers. All of that should have a really good, robust mapping, so that you can almost see at provider level, how all of those national strategies and initiatives, including the Cyber Tom, are included. So what you're trying to get to with strategy, and the reason that this slide sort of exists, is kind of that statement there, is that every action, and the world's not this perfect, but really every single thing that happens at any organisation, whether it's in the NHS, whether it's in local government or anywhere, should be determined by they should be pulling in the same direction, and they should be trying to in some way enable the core mission of the organisation, that enables the vision of the organisation. Essentially, the example that we've got there is that when we wrote the SNE, forgive me, acronym error, ESNEFT, organisational provider strategy. At the same time as doing that handily, we also helped refresh their digital data strategy. So we're able to embed cyber really clearly in that digital and data strategy, and that really embedded how they're going to deliver their EPR. So there's an EPR program ongoing at the trust now. So it allowed us to sort of embed cybersecurity in digital, which was clearly embedded in their EPR, basically almost the raison d'etre for the whole organisation for certainly the next few years. So that's why it's really important that you've got a whole line of traceability, so you can see or people can see that every request that's for a service, everything that goes through a change request, they know why that's being asked for, and it relates in some way, shape, or form effectively to the EPR, to delivering something that the organisation has said is critical. So that's why mapping is so important. And I guess onto the sort of high level mapping that you spoke about, Sean. Dan, you want to sort of take us through this, the vision statement and the mapping left to right?
Yeah, so kind of one of the outputs of you kind of doing the not just the tracing and mapping exercise, but also the stakeholder engagement and the document reviews, etc., is to establish what is the vision statement for SNE as the ICS with regards to cyber. As we know that cyber underpins, as Jim's just been saying, digital strategies, organizational strategies, etc., there is a need to ensure that we play back some of that language. So to ensure that everybody within the ICS and those that will consume the strategy understand that this isn't just a standalone document to the left or to the right of the broader organizational kind of objectives. This is something that literally underpins the way in which we deliver those other priorities and those other kind of strategic objectives. So, for example, in this case here, we have cyber as an enabler of safe, resilient digital care across Suffolk and North East Essex. The latter part of that vision statement is a replay and a playback of the SNE ICS strategy itself, the organizational strategy itself. And from our analysis, having cyber as an enabler puts it in that supportive but all-encompassing kind of realm, if you will, of where it positions itself across all the activities. So underneath the vision, we have the high level kind of mapping exercise from the CAF control kind of framework all the way through into the government. We started off with the government cyber strategy and then into the health and social care strategy. There's a whole bunch of analysis that sits under this where we basically are able to trace common themes and threads, contextualize that with the stakeholder and document reviews that we've done with SNE and from across the region, to be able to build out these 5 kind of core missions here: normalize cyber risk, continuous cyber visibility, etc., etc. These are kind of the pivot points, and then on the next slide we see how they then get translated into, if you have your 5 core missions, a set of objectives. If we can ping along, Jim, thank you, sir, ping along into the underpinning objectives, and those objectives then have initiatives, outputs and measurements, which then the ICS help deliver against and drive the delivery of. By achieving these, we know through the traceability, etc., that we are going to be squaring off a whole host of CAF, if not all CAF kind of controls. They now need to be embedded and lived and breathed by, sure, but we have coverage across them. We have coverage across the core obligations of the Health and Social Care Act, Health and Social Care Cyber Strategy. And then we have delivered them through the missions in a manner that is consumable, that is proportionate, that is relative to the regional organizations themselves, right? So this is not done from an perspective of an ivory tower. This is done with local organizations and made as painless to consume, to understand, to adhere to as possible. So that is effectively the approach that we have taken, and the reasons that we have taken it. We don't want things to be imposed. We don't want the strategy to be imposed on organizations. It becomes less effective by exponentially almost by doing so. Doing it with the organizations, supported and driven by the ICS themselves, makes the kind of likelihood of success so much greater and so much higher, and also the willingness to then actually contribute and pull all in the same direction by those that the strategy covers also increases, which then ultimately improves the chances of successful delivery.
Yeah, and the ones highlighted in red there, I guess, we'll sort of pick out an example of moving from the, I guess, the strategic and the strategic plan level into operational change, and how we've started to do that with SNI and other organisations, and just give you an example of those particular areas. I think we've picked out the DSP and DSPT and CAF. We've talked about shared artifacts, so that's part of the that collectively cyber secure piece. And then we've talked about nationally available services. I think that's sort of a critical thing to point out, is that there are a lot of shared artifacts, nationally available services. There's a lot of great stuff around the CAF that's all coming out, that almost should be a first port of call, really, when you're making, as either providers or as a region, investment decisions in where to invest time and effort, what's the greatest risk, and then what's to invest that time and effort in. It's not always about buying security products. There's a lot of investment in digital products, security products, hardware, software, typically in lots of NHS organisations. I think the move to a strategic approach will really start. You're still going to need that. There's a lot of consolidation that's probably required. But there should be a much greater focus on actually what's the service, what's the outcome that I need to get out of this particular mission statement. So those particular areas, as we move through, I'll just have a quick check on chat. Have we got anything new into chat? There's some talkative people on. I know that. Sean, you're definitely on. No additional chat. I'll expect that to light up at some point. So then the turning strategy into action. I think when we've spoken to a couple of people, both within the region, the ICS, and other people that we're sort of talking to about these sorts of initiatives. The critical thing really is that the action plan that sits at the end of it, and actually getting change to happen. The strategy, that's it's important. We talked through the process of getting that together. We think the timelines, September is the first iteration of the strategy that's going to get reviewed by probably cyber leads, I believe, and then the joint cyber unit later on in the year. And then potentially the funding that might come out of this, subject to caveats that always live around funding, would be available from March onwards. But at that point, what we really need, ideally, is really two things. One, is there any local investment that doesn't rely on national funding? Because I think that's been a challenge for the work that we've done with SNI, is that funding just comes in pockets. Usually when it's just made available, it's usually capital funding, right? So hopefully there'll be a move to invest specifically in cybersecurity, and then clearly there is investment being made by the centre. We think significant amounts of operational budget. So it's once you've got a strategy together, it's what's the action plan, and then what are the most important things that you can be doing, both as a region or the ICS and as individual providers, to move yourself along the resilience journey. So in terms of those particular areas, so the way that we're approaching that with SNI and I think 3 of the providers is excuse me, looking at the CAF. I mean, the CAF is no secret, the CAF is here. It is now into the DSPT. I think there are some CAF webinars going on. In fact, we might be clashing with one of the CAF webinars today, but there are certainly some nationally delivered webinars to upskill or inform people around how best to use the CAF. So the example that I've shown here, you know, what we've done with the CAF assessment in this particular example is just mapped a couple of trusts one to another, so we can start to sort of look at clearly different trusts across a system. The data in here, by the way, is just made up, and then that starts to show from a regional level areas of good performance generally. So you can start to assess regionally, you know, what are our greatest risks and harms in our local geographies. But also you can start to look provider by provider and share good practice where you see them and what are people doing, and then start to share, you know, that good practice between different providers. Then you can get a more granular view than this when you look at the sort of sub-principal layer. You can get a less granular view and just look at the CAF outcomes, the 4 CAF outcomes. So we've started to sort of build a data set, and we've looked at, we've done sort of relatively straightforward CAF reviews for a number of the organisations now. They're going to get mapped into a tool that we're building effectively for the CAF generally, but for SNE, that helps map all of that data so they can start to get a good view across the region, at least as a first view for those few providers that are running the assessment. Now, what that then leads into, I think we're doing that at the ICB itself, the corporate, and then 2 of the main NHS providers. What that then leads into is you can start to make sort of some calls as to where you've got decent amounts of maturity and where you haven't, where you've got gaps, i.e. risks, and where you haven't. Our approach to that, because if you've got a level of immaturity in a particular area, you might want to just sort of bite 1 or 2 things off at the same time, because I think if you, you know, when you start running through the CAF, it's different to the DSPT. You know, there is going to be a lot of non-aligned or partially aligned across the system. So, you know, fixing all of that in year 1, not going to happen. And I don't think the system expects providers to do that. They don't. You know, it'll be a gradual ramping up in the expectation, I think, around CAF. So you can effectively look at, you know, using that sort of maturity analysis model, you can sort of look at areas where you're sort of scoring 2s and 3s out of 5 and actually decide where you need to make targeted investments. And you can pick those areas out. We've used the example here, and again, to the point of using nationally available services, that sort of technical remediation service that's been available from NHS Digital for some time has gone into, and lots of you will have received assessments on things like backup, Active Directory security, so effectively core identity. You know, you can pick out, if you get a response back from an assessment that says you're high level, you look like you might need some extra work in this area, then it's important to then pick out that particular area or the technologies that are particularly prevalent in that particular area, and then look in them in more detail. And a good place to start with improvement is always policy. That's the thing that drives everything. It should be, have you got a good, robust policy for that particular domain or CAF outcome in place? Because if you haven't got a policy, then you know, no surprise, everything else falls to pieces underneath the policy. So start with policy, start with them grouped, because you're not going to boil the ocean, and just pick out what you think is you know, the most important thing in that space. The sort of follow on from the policy work and the example that we've used again there. Again, the vulnerability management policy, the reason we sent that out is because that's obviously a critical area that everybody needs to get right. So from an ICS perspective, you know, that's the sort of thought leadership in that. I know we're doing some work with John, and how many providers have we got running that vulnerability assessment, John? I think it's 3 or 4.
Yeah, it's 3 we're currently running with.
The 3 current. So, you know, just building up a model of, you know, CAF maturity, what does that look like? You know, areas where we know we've led before the CAF maturity assessment because we know it's a critical area in vulnerability. But then you're looking at do policies work? Are they CAF aligned critically? Because the policy obviously needs to be aligned with all the standards and the things that they need to drive from a national perspective. But also, I think it's important locally. And then when you move from policy, then you can start to look at maturity against, good practice, best practice. So the example that we use here will do a similar mapping of maturity against, and we use NIST in this example. So effectively, it's the stages in a good, robust vulnerability management process. And then you can start to look at actually what's causing me to score poorly in the CAF for this particular sub-principle or principle. And then you can start to make really targeted changes that might be people, process, technology, could be any of those three things. It's probably more likely to be in people and process, if history tells me anything, where most of the improvements are going to be needed. But you can start to sort of tweak those things up effectively. So you don't have to solve the whole thing and become brilliant at everything and green across the board. I think we've got the level set fairly high there, but I would expect most trusts, when the CAF returns go into the DSPT, to be trying to achieve somewhere in that amber scale as a first iteration, because it is a very different way of looking at your services than the DSPT before it. Dan, in terms of using things like CMMI or maturity models generally, I mean, we worked with you at NHSBT a little bit. Do you want to talk through the value of using those and the sorts of models you might use?
Yes, certainly. So I think from my perspective, using a maturity model like, as Jim was saying, kind of CMMI or COBIT, or there's a whole host, right, which can be used 0 to 5 kind of scale. From my perspective, from a leadership angle, it just enables you to gives you greater insight, not just in terms of as Jim was talking about, the specific items which need immediate kind of addressing, the ones where you score 0s and 1s and things along those lines, but it also enables you to get that oversight over time about progress. So it's not just going to be the binary pass, fail, partial in some instances. This can actually give you a line of sight as to, are we on the right trajectory? Okay, we accept we're not going to be perfect overnight, but are we moving in the right direction? And are we focusing on those areas that need to be focused on? Because if say I had a report similar to this, or a view similar to this, and around vulnerability management, and my team were focusing on kind of one of the 3s, like to move us up to a 4, whilst we still had a 1 languishing at 1, that would mean that we have misallocated precious resource, and actually kind of almost wasted our time a little bit. So we then gives us the ability to focus, especially when we have to make trade-off considerations between spending time, treasure, and effort on this thing here versus another part of the digital area, another part of kind of the transformation agenda, or other operational activities. It enables us to give us a justification, it enables us to give us visibility of progress over time, and enables us to go make difficult decisions with kind of evidence-based and evidence-led, which is really important and something you don't get from a binary yes/no assessment.
Great. I guess so what we're sort of trying to get to with the whole strategic initiative piece, I guess that original question. So sort of how does cybersecurity and privacy enable culture and operational change effectively? How is cyber going to switch from becoming effectively, a cost center at best, really? I mean, I think you could say that across lots of public sector organizations for lots of different perfectly valid reasons. That absolutely IT has been viewed as a cost center for a long time now, over a decade, hence all of the tech debt and the other problems that we talked about right at the very start. But how do you move from that to a position where actually cybersecurity is viewed as a really good way to enable the digital transformation that the system needs. So, hopefully this will give you a view of, started at sort of, alignment of to the national plans, to digital plans, to care objectives, and then into sort of discussing really in detail with the different providers across the region, critically, not just technical SMEs, but more importantly, really, with clinical SMEs or other SMEs that are involved in the thing that your organisation does, and really sort of distilling that into some core missions and objectives that how to, the sort of smart objectives that have got a timeline set around them. You know how to report on them, so you're able to keep boards and anybody else that is interested, NHSE, the regions, other providers, availed of effectively data that says, here's what we're doing, here's where we are as an organisation, and importantly that you feel, I guess, able to do that. One of the big parts of the mission statements here will be, and I think the ICS have always been really great at this. At SNE, I think, John, one of the first things we talked about was got to move away from everyone sort of hiding a little bit because it's cyber or because it's digital, and hiding the homework a little bit. So I guess this has tried to sort of take you from all of that strategic thinking into actually an example of how you might then turn that into action at providers, a mechanism then to report up the line to the system. I think the different strategies and tactics that will be picked up by providers themselves are going to be different. Clearly, there's a lot of work, as Dan suggested earlier on, that's already happened. There are a lot of things already in play. Certainly, there are national services that we strongly recommend you at least considering very carefully before sort of investing in other areas. Things like Defender, the national instance of Defender. We're doing a lot of work around that, and there are improvements being made to those services all the time. But we do recognise actually there is an awful lot of work to do across the system. I think John did share a couple of questions, and we've had questions previously from different providers around, should we be building a regional SOC? What should we be doing as a region to help improve cyber? And I think that the unusually, I guess, we're a supplier of those sorts of services. That we pushed back and sort of said, the first thing you want to be doing really is working out, what you need to try and address first, and then coming up with a set of people, processes, and technologies that best help you achieve the objectives. And you don't do that unless you've got a robust strategy that's in place. So, it might be the right answer. I don't really think that lots of regions at the moment really know what the right answer is. So, if it were me, I think just buying a sort of regional SOC at the moment is premature. There is a very good SOC that's within NHS Digital. I think the answer will be, it will certainly be probably augmentation and sharing the burden regionally, probably with suppliers like MTI, we hope, but certainly with the national team and the national CSOC. So hopefully that's sort of taken you from, where we started out, what was the mission, through all those different things. Thank you for the confirmation that that CAF webinar was this morning at 10. That's good news, and well done for going on it, David and Nick. So that is good news. But yeah, you'll start to hear a lot more about CAF. I guess final things in the Q&A. Great tea, obviously CMMI. Sean, I know you're a fan of all things maturity. That's great stuff. Any question in there? Yeah, true. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. We would completely agree with that statement, Sean. So I think the more granular you can make maturity assessments, the better. absolutely. And the more simple you can make them, the better. I think the intention with the guys at SNE, I guess, as we move through the next few months, is to upskill local teams to be able to sort of do those things as well. It's not all just about sort of going to suppliers to do these things for you. There's going to need to be a ramping up of local capacity, local capability. So we see this very much as a sort of as a partnership. But I think, John, final words to you. We haven't had a lot of questions for you, so probably good. I think that's positive. But where do you see this going? And any final comments or thoughts from you as the ICB lead?
Well, I mean, the engagement has really, really helped us. As you said earlier on, we had a lot of piecemeal initiatives hitting what we thought were the key risk points across the ICS, but it was very much piecemeal. And the work that you've done for us, and in particular, engaging all our key stakeholders across the ICS, that secured the buy-in for our strategy and plan going forward. For me, the problem was knowing where to start. I had some ideas. I thought I knew what the baseline looked out there. It was good to have it ratified through the work that you've done for us. And yes, I look forward to taking the strategy and plan to the ICB board in a few weeks' time.
And fingers crossed it gets signed off after all that. I think we've had some good feedback from the NHSE cyber lead. So I'm fairly confident. I hope that this has been a useful session for people. I think we made the offer when we sent the invites out to run any specific focus workshops that people might want. I think we said ICBs, but more than happy to do that at provider level. I think we'll be sending out some follow-up collateral. We'll certainly send the deck out. I think somebody said they liked a slide, so you're welcome to have the deck. We'll send that out shortly. If there are any requests for that follow-up session, it's probably Dan and I for an hour just to talk either strategy, or we can talk about sort of that augmented resilience thing. Sean, I've just seen your note. That's really what we mean by augmented resilience is, we are waiting for that NHSE operational TOM. We obviously got the ICS one at the moment to work with. I think absolutely we're looking to sort of work out what is the best way of aligning our own services, as a provider with those of NHSE, so we're not effectively doubling up on services, because that's just not what the system needs. It needs to be targeted investment that's not competing. So yeah, all those things, basically, that's really what we mean by augmented resilience as a sort of a partner to the system. So yeah, like I said, thank you ever so much for all of your time. I think we're bang on time, remarkably. If anyone's got any other questions, any other follow-up workshops, then just respond back to the deck when we send that out, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon. We might run another session in follow-up to this, I guess, in the next quarter. If we get sign off, we get sight of the operational TOM. If you think that would be useful, put a yes in the chat, or anything else that you want to know in the chat. Again, thank you very much. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, John, and we'll see you again soon.
Cheers, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.